Have you ever heard of a simple act of kindness that accidentally unlocked a life-changing secret? This story begins with a mechanic in a small mountain town, the kind of man who fixes cars, not destinies. One day, a quiet woman walks into his garage, asking him to restore an old rusted car that once belonged to her grandfather. He agrees, thinking it's just another job. But what he finds hidden deep inside the car will lead them both on a journey neither of them ever expected. A discovery that ties them to a forgotten love, a buried treasure, and a legacy waiting to be reclaimed. This isn't just a story about a car. It's about how sometimes the most extraordinary things are hidden inside the most ordinary moments. If stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We share inspiring tales of love, kindness, and second chances, the kind that remind us there's always more to the story than meets the eye. Now, let's begin. Mechanic rebuilds a vintage car for a woman, only to know it's a hidden treasure worth billions. The sound of tires crunching over gravel pulled Tom Parker from beneath the hood of a stubborn '72 Dodge Dart. It was a sound he knew well, someone with a problem looking for a fix. In Silver Creek, Colorado, that usually meant a busted carburetor or a cracked fan belt. But when he stepped out from his garage and wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, what he saw stopped him cold. A battered red pickup truck had backed into his lot, towing behind it a trailer carrying the skeleton of what had once been a masterpiece. Even under layers of dust and rust, Tom recognized it. A Duesenberg Model J, 1932, if his eyes didn't deceive him. He hadn't seen one in person in over 2 decades. They were legends, ghosts on wheels. Seeing one in a place like Silver Creek was like stumbling upon a Rembrandt at a flea market. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She looked like she belonged in another time, or at least another town. Tall, graceful, wrapped in a grey wool coat with leather, gloves and boots that had seen more city pavement than mountain snow. Her hair, dark and pinned up, framed a face that was striking, not for its beauty, though she had that, but for something else. A kind of stillness, the look of someone who had spent too many hours lost in thought. "You, Tom Parker?" she asked, her voice low and even. "That's me," he said, nodding toward the trailer. "Yours?" She glanced at the Duesenberg and gave a short, almost embarrassed nod. "It was my grandfather's. I'd like it restored." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You sure it's not beyond saving?" "I'm sure," she said, meeting his eyes. There was something in her tone that silenced the rest of the questions forming on his tongue. Not entitlement, not desperation, something quieter, determined. "Well," he said, "you've brought it to the right place. Let's get her unhitched." They worked together in silence, the wind carrying the smell of pine and snow. As they rolled the trailer into the garage, Tom couldn't resist running his fingers along the frame. The once shining chrome was dull and pitted. The tires were rotted, the leather interior long since given way to mold and decay. But the bones of the car, the lines of the body, the sweep of the fenders, still carried echoes of grandeur. "Not many people would go through the trouble for a wreck like this," Tom said, glancing at her. She hesitated, then said, "It's not just about the car. It's about what it meant to him, what it might still mean." Tom caught something in her voice, an emotion carefully tucked away. Grief, maybe, or unfinished business. "What's your name?" he asked. Elise Vega." That name, Vega, tickled something at the back of his memory, but he let it go. "All right, Elise. You want full restoration?" "As close as possible to the original," she said. "I want it like he would have remembered it." Tom gave a short nod. "It'll take time, months, maybe longer. Parts like this don't grow on trees." "I'm not in a hurry," she said. He handed her the intake form. She filled it out with elegant, deliberate strokes, then handed it back. As she turned to leave, Tom called out, "Why now? Why restore it after all these years?" She paused at the door. "Because I think there's more to this car than anyone." Realized. Then she left, just like that, disappearing down the gravel road with the same quiet resolve she'd arrived with. Tom spent the rest of the day circling the car like a detective at a crime scene. He wasn't just looking at rust or decay. He was reading signs, searching for clues in dents and bolts and faded paint. Underneath the passenger seat, as he tugged at the remnants of a disintegrated leather cushion, something slipped out and fell to the floor. He picked it up carefully. A photograph, old, fragile, its edges curled with time. It showed a young couple standing proudly beside the Duesenberg, shining and new. Behind them, a harbor stretched out, and in the background, a large ship was docked. On the bottom corner of the photo, written in graceful cursive, were 5 words: "Last stop before freedom, 1933. Tom stared at the image. Something about it made his skin prickle. The man in the photo had sharp cheekbones and a confident smile. The woman clung to his arm, her face radiant. The photo didn't look like a casual family keepsake. It looked like a message, a memory. Preserved for a reason. He flipped it over, but the back was blank. Setting it on the workbench, he exhaled slowly. It wasn't the first time he'd found something inside a car. Old coins, forgotten tools, even a love letter once. But this was different. That night, Tom sat at his kitchen table, the photo beside his coffee mug, his mind turning. Something about the date, 1933, kept catching his attention. That was the year of the Gold Reserve Act, the year private ownership of gold had been outlawed. That had sent shockwaves through the country. Hoarders burying coins, collectors hiding what they could. A time of secrecy and fear, of things being hidden and forgotten. And now, here was a Duesenberg, reappearing in a small mountain town, carrying whispers from that same year. He couldn't sleep. Back at the garage before dawn, Tom popped open the glove box. It creaked like a coffin. Inside, beneath a rat's nest of debris, he found a yellowed envelope folded and brittle with age. No name, just a seal, cracked and faded, and inside, a clipping from a newspaper dated October 1933. The headline read, "3 million in Spanish gold vanishes in mysterious train heist." No leads. Tom read the article 3 times. The details were sparse. A freight train robbed outside Colorado Springs, guards tied up, no suspects, no trail. But near the bottom, his eyes caught a curious line. Witnesses report seeing a luxury automobile speeding away from the scene, believed to be a Duesenberg. He looked at the car again, at the photo, at the name Vega. A chill worked its way through his spine. He didn't believe in coincidence, not when it came to things built with this much precision. Not when it came to women who appeared out of nowhere, with ghosts in their eyes. Something told him Elise Vega wasn't just here for a restoration, and this car was hiding something much bigger than rust. The next morning, the air in Silver Creek was crisp enough to bite. A thin sheen of frost glazed the edges of the garage's windows, and Tom Parker's breath fogged the cold as he opened the bay doors and stood for a moment in silence. The Duesenberg sat where he'd left it, long, elegant even in decay, like a sleeping relic unwilling to give up its secrets. But Tom knew better than to be fooled by beauty. He'd seen it before. Beneath the surface, time did its damage to everything, even legends. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The morning passed in a quiet rhythm of metal and memory. Bolts groaned in protest as he loosened them from their decades-long slumber. Molded leather cracked beneath his gloves. He worked with care, treating each piece like it might crumble with the wrong pressure. It wasn't just about restoring the car anymore. It was about uncovering something Elise might not even know she was chasing. When he pulled out the rear bench seat, a rush of dust filled the air. Tom waved a hand and squinted through the cloud. Something shimmered faintly beneath. The floorboard, not metal, not dirt. Carefully, he pried open the cracked wood panel beneath the seat. There, nestled in a pocket of darkness, was a thin velvet pouch. Tom hesitated. Then, slowly, he lifted it out and placed it gently on the workbench. His fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon as he unwrapped the brittle fabric. Inside were two items, a silver pendant shaped like a lion's head, intricate old-world craftsmanship, and a folded yellowed envelope sealed with wax, bearing a family crest he didn't recognize. The initials AV were etched on the pendant's back, Antonio Vega. Tom's eyes narrowed. The name finally clicked. He remembered reading about Vega years ago, a Spanish nobleman who fled Europe in the early 1930s under mysterious circumstances. He'd been linked to rumors of smuggling gold and priceless art out of Europe as the continent teetered toward war. The story had vanished like smoke. No one ever proved anything, and now here was his car. Tom didn't believe in fairy tales, but this was starting to feel like the beginning of one. Later that afternoon, Elise returned. She didn't announce herself, just pushed open the door and stepped inside, bringing the scent of cold air and pine needles with her. Tom looked up from the workbench where he'd laid out the pendant and envelope, now protected under a clear plastic sheet. "You found something," she said, not as a question. "I did," Tom replied, watching her closely. "Under the seat. This was hidden pretty well." She walked over slowly, her eyes locking on the lion pendant first. Her face changed. Something flickered, like recognition, or maybe memory. She reached out, but stopped herself. "This crest," Tom said, tapping the wax seal. "It's not American." "No," Elise said softly. "It's Spanish, my grandfather's family crest. I've only ever seen it once, on a letter my mother kept in her drawer." Tom leaned back against the workbench. "You said you barely knew him." "I didn't. He died when I was 6. My mother never talked about him much, said he was complicated." Tom raised an eyebrow. "That's one way to put it." Elise exhaled slowly, then ran a hand over her face. "He came to America in 1932. That's all I know for sure. Changed his name, bought property under a different identity. The rest was family myth." "Well," Tom said, gesturing to the pendant, "this myth just became a lot more real." She stared at the items for a long time, then finally asked, "What's in the envelope?" "I haven't opened it," Tom said. "Didn't feel right, figured you should." Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the wax. Inside was a folded map. Hand-drawn, edges faded with age. It depicted a stretch of the Colorado Rockies, but not in any modern format. The paper was marked with coordinates, unfamiliar symbols, and one unmistakable X in red ink. At the bottom of the map was a line written in elegant looping script. "If you ever find this, follow the lion. It will lead you home." Elise sank onto a stool, staring at the map like it might speak. Tom gave her a moment before breaking the silence. "Your grandfather wasn't just fleeing Spain, was he?" "No," she whispered. "He was hiding something. By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains, they'd pieced together what little they could. The pendant was likely a marker, something that would match or activate a lock. The map, though vague, corresponded to an old mining trail outside Silver Creek, long abandoned after the war. And the photograph Tom had found? Elise confirmed the man was her grandfather. The woman beside him was not her grandmother. "He had a life before coming here," she said, "a past none of us knew about." Tom didn't press. He could see how overwhelmed she was. But he also saw something else in her, resolve, curiosity, maybe even hope. "You think the treasure's real?" Elise asked quietly. Tom thought for a moment. "I think if someone like your grandfather went to these lengths to hide something, it was worth hiding. Doesn't mean it was gold, but it meant something to him." She nodded, then looked him straight in the eye. "Would you come with me if I followed the map?" He hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. He wasn't in the business of adventures. His life was simple by design, safe, predictable. But then he looked at the car, the map, the pendant, and her. "I will," he said, "if you're sure you're ready to find what's at the end." Her smile was small but genuine, the first real one he'd seen from her. "I think I have." To be. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He sat at his table again, the map spread before him, the lion pendant glinting under the light. He felt it in his bones, the way old soldiers feel storms coming. Something was waiting out there in those mountains, and it was calling them both. The first snowfall came early that year. It blanketed Silver Creek in a hush, softening the sharp edges of the small mountain town. Outside the garage windows, flakes drifted lazily past the pine trees. But inside, Tom Parker worked steadily, his breath visible in the chill air. A space heater buzzed ineffectively in the corner, but he hardly noticed. The Duesenberg had his full attention, and so did the mystery wrapped inside it. He had spent the better part of the morning dismantling the dashboard, gingerly removing each brittle component. Every screw, every fragment of leather or wiring, he handled like a museum curator. The deeper he went, the more certain he became. This car was never meant to be just a car. It was a container, a message, and now it was beginning to speak. Behind the paneling, tucked into the cavity where the radio had once been mounted, Tom found a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Carefully, he peeled back the layers to reveal a stack of fragile documents, photographs, handwritten notes, and a folded sheet of parchment that smelled faintly of smoke and age. Tom's hands trembled slightly as he laid the items out on the workbench. The first was a black and white photo, its edges crumbling. It showed the same couple from the original picture, Elise's grandfather, Antonio Vega, and the unknown woman, this time seated inside the Duesenberg. The woman's face was more clearly visible. She was beautiful, poised, with a gaze that hinted at both elegance and danger. A name was scribbled on the back, Isabel. Next, a page torn from a journal. The ink had faded in spots, but Tom could still read most of it. "The treasure is no longer safe in Europe. I have made arrangements. The car will carry the last of it. Isabel says we must vanish after New York. The port is watched. Colorado will be safer. The Americans don't ask questions if you pay them not to." Beneath that, a map, different from the one they had already found. This one was printed, a railway map of the western United States, with several markings in red pencil. One circled Colorado Springs. Another traced a line through a mountain pass Tom recognized, a few miles outside of Silver Creek. Tom exhaled slowly. A car, a woman, a treasure smuggled through America under the eyes of history. And now, decades later, the final pieces of that forgotten puzzle had landed in his garage. Elise arrived that afternoon, snowflakes clinging to the shoulders of her coat. She looked less like a stranger now, more like someone returning home, a woman slowly reclaiming a story she never knew belonged to her. "You found something again, didn't you?" she asked, stepping into the warmth of the garage. Tom didn't answer right away. He simply handed her the photo of Isabel. She stared at it for a long time. "She's not my grandmother." "No," Tom said gently. "I don't think she was." Elisa's fingers traced the image as if hoping to pull truth from the paper. "My mother never mentioned any of this. Not Isabel, not Colorado, just that her father came here with nothing and built a quiet life." "Well, that part may still be true," Tom said, "but it wasn't by accident." He showed her the journal page, then the railway map. Elise absorbed the words in silence, her brow furrowed. "What does it mean?" she finally whispered. Tom tapped the journal page. It means your grandfather wasn't just running from something, he was protecting something. And this car, it wasn't just transportation, it was a vault, maybe even a decoy. Elise looked back at the Duesenberg, her expression shifting. The reverence in her eyes deepened. All these years, it just sat in that barn, covered in dust, forgotten. Not forgotten, Tom said, just waiting for the right person to remember. She smiled faintly, but it faded quickly. Do you really believe there's still something out there after all this time? Tom hesitated, then nodded. Yes, and I think your grandfather left enough breadcrumbs to help us find it. Over the next few days, they worked side by side, combing through every inch of the Duesenberg, searching not just for secrets, but for understanding. They discovered small things, a ring lodged between floorboards, stamped with a Spanish insignia, a tobacco tin hidden inside the spare tire compartment, containing more scraps of writing, directions, coded references to tunnels and storage crates, names crossed out in haste. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Antonio. Vega had orchestrated something monumental. With the help of Isabel, perhaps a lover, perhaps an accomplice, he had transported a fortune across an ocean and into the American wilderness, hiding it in plain sight. And then he had disappeared into a quiet life, never speaking of it again. But why? One evening, as snow fell in thick sheets outside and the garage lights glowed like a lantern against the storm, Elise sat at Tom's workbench, flipping through the journal fragments. She looked tired, but alive in a way he hadn't seen before, like the layers were slowly peeling away to reveal someone real, someone fighting to reconnect with something lost. I used to think my family didn't matter, she said quietly. My mother never talked about where she came from. I thought maybe there was nothing to say, just ordinary people living ordinary lives. Tom leaned against the frame of the Duesenberg, arms crossed, listening. But this changes everything. My grandfather wasn't just some immigrant trying to survive. He was part of something bigger. He made sacrifices I never understood. Tom nodded. Maybe that's why he kept it secret, so the past wouldn't weigh down the future. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. And now, he said, you have a choice. You can let it stay buried, or you can see it through. Her lips parted, then closed again. She glanced at the pendant, the lion, sitting beside the map on the workbench. Its gaze was unblinking, regal. I want to see it through, she said, but I don't want to do it alone. Tom didn't smile. He didn't need to. The quiet agreement between them had already taken root. We'll follow the trail, he said, together. That night, as Elise drove away through the snow-covered streets, Tom stood at the garage's threshold, watching her taillights fade into the white. Behind him, the Duesenberg gleamed under the soft lights, no longer just a relic of the past, but a living bridge between then and now. There were still pieces missing, but they were getting closer. And for the first time in years, Tom felt like a man not just restoring a machine, but rebuilding something far greater. Tom had always believed that the true soul of a car lived in its frame, not in the paint or the shine, but in the places no one looked, the rusted corners, the hidden welds, the imperfections covered by time. And in the case of the Duesenberg, it was becoming increasingly clear. This car didn't just have a soul, it had secrets. On a brisk Thursday morning, with snow still clinging to the garage roof and the mountains beyond blanketed in white, Tom slipped beneath the chassis with a flashlight and a pry bar. The map Elise had found pointed to a location near Silver Creek, but it also hinted at something locked within the steel. That line had gnawed at him all night. He slid the lights slowly along the undercarriage, inspecting every bolt, every weld. The Duesenberg's body had been heavily modified, more than was typical, even for a high-end custom job. He tapped. on the floor pan, solid, then again and again until he heard it, a hollow thunk. Tom froze. He tapped again, slower this time. It wasn't just a panel, it was a compartment, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it wasn't found by accident. With delicate hands, he worked the pry bar beneath the seam, feeling the tension in the metal. A faint crack split open. Tom widened it, inch by inch, until he revealed a rectangular cavity carved into the very bones of the car. Inside was a lead-lined box, no bigger than a shoebox. He pulled it out and set it on the workbench with a weighty thud. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. When he finally lifted the lid, he was met not with gold, but parchment, several pages folded and sealed together with wax. Atop the bundle was a small, ornate key made of brass, and beneath it a ring wrapped in cloth. Tom gently unwrapped the ring. It was heavier than it looked, engraved with a royal crest and a Latin inscription, Fortis in Fide, strong in faith. He knew immediately this wasn't costume jewelry. It was something else, a symbol of status, possibly a seal. He ran his fingers over the parchment, then picked up the key and turned it over in his hand. A lock. Somewhere. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. The car had just confirmed what he and Elise had begun to suspect. Her grandfather hadn't just hidden something valuable. He'd left a trail, and it wasn't over yet. Elise arrived just after lunch, shaking off the cold as she stepped into the warmth of the garage. She looked different these days, not in the obvious ways, but in how she carried herself, like someone walking into her story instead of standing on the sidelines of someone else's. Tom didn't say anything right away. He simply handed her the ring. She took it slowly, her eyes widening as she studied the crest. "This was his," she whispered. "I've seen it in old sketches. My mother said it was part of our family lineage, tied to Spanish nobility." Tom showed her the key next. "Found this with the ring and some sealed documents." Elise moved toward the workbench, her breath catching as she saw the box. "Have you opened the documents?" she asked. "Not yet. Thought you should." With great care she broke the wax seal. Inside were handwritten instructions, coded references to locations, symbols, and finally a description that made her sit down slowly. "Under the lion's shadow where stone meets sky, the chamber waits. The key will show the way." Elise looked up at Tom, her voice quiet. "He built a vault." Tom nodded. "Looks like it." They spread the documents across the workbench, analyzing every detail. A sketch accompanied the writing. A mountain, range, a specific rock formation that looked like a crouching lion, and coordinates scribbled in the margin. Tom recognized it. "That's just past Beartooth Ridge. There's an old mining trail out that way, barely used anymore." Elise stared at the page, her eyes filled with something between fear and awe. "What if we're really chasing treasure?" she said. "What if you're chasing your grandfather's redemption?" Tom countered. "He clearly meant for someone, you, to find this. Maybe not just for the gold, maybe for the truth." The next day, with the sky a pale canvas and the snow crunching beneath their boots, Tom and Elise hiked through the thick pines toward Beartooth Ridge. Tom carried a pack with tools, a flashlight, and the key. Elise clutched the map and the documents, bundled in layers of wool and determination. It took them over an hour to reach the rock formation. The mountain loomed ahead, and just as the sketch described, the stones jutted upward like a lion crouched. In wait, they stopped at the base of the formation, panting in the cold air. "There," Elise pointed. "See that opening? Half covered by snow and brush, a narrow crevice in the stone wall yawned open like a mouth long forgotten." Tom approached first, clearing the debris. Inside, the tunnel was short, but just wide enough for them to squeeze through. At the end, a door. Not just any door, It was old, reinforced with steel, and in the center was a circular lock with an emblem that matched the brass key. Tom pulled it out and held it toward Elise. "You ready?" She nodded. Her fingers wrapped around the key, and with a deep breath, she slid it into the lock. It turned with a soft click. The door groaned as it opened inward, revealing a small chamber lit only by the slivers of daylight filtering in behind them. Dust hung thick in the air, and in the center of the room, resting atop a stone pedestal, was a wooden chest bound in iron. They stepped forward together. Tom ran his hand along the lid, then looked at her. "Want to do the honors?" Elise nodded, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside, velvet-lined compartments cradled stacks of gold coins, Spanish doubloons, pristine and glimmering even in the dim light. Nestled between them were scrolls, jewels, and a sealed letter addressed simply, "To my blood, Elise." Pressed a hand to her mouth, tears rising to her eyes. Tom said nothing. He simply stood beside her as the weight of generations settled into the silence. Back at the garage that evening, Elise sat beside the Duesenberg, holding the letter to her chest. "He left it all," she whispered. "Not just the treasure, but the truth." Tom nodded, wiping his hands clean. "And he left it for the one person who could carry it forward." Her eyes met his. "I couldn't have done it without you." Tom smiled gently. "Maybe, but you're the one who chose to follow the map." And together they looked at the car, no longer a broken relic, but a vessel of memory, of history, and of hope. There were still things to uncover, still choices to make, but for the first time, the road ahead didn't feel like a mystery. It felt like a promise. The morning after the discovery, the world outside seemed quieter, as if even the wind was holding its breath. Snow clung to the pines like powdered sugar, and the mountains beyond Silver Creek sat wrapped in mist. But inside the garage, tension buzzed just beneath the surface. Tom leaned over the workbench, eyes skimming through the translated letter Elise had found in the chest. The gold, the jewels, the history, all real, and yet his thoughts kept circling one question. Why now? Why had Elise suddenly come looking for this car? Why had she seemed so sure that it mattered? She hadn't asked for the treasure. She hadn't even known it existed. Or had she? He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Elise entered the garage quietly, bundled in her coat, hair damp with melting snow. Her eyes landed on the open letter on the bench, but her expression didn't change. "Morning," she said softly. Tom straightened up. "You sleep at all?" "A little," she replied, though her voice betrayed her. Tom hesitated before asking, "You want to tell me how you really found this car?" Elise looked at him, not startled, not offended, almost relieved. "I wondered when you'd ask." She walked past him, tracing her fingers along the Duesenberg's curve, the same way someone might trace the line of a memory too painful to speak aloud. Then she sat on the old stool near the tool cabinet and exhaled. "My mother died 6 months ago," she began, eyes fixed on the floor. "Cancer. It was fast and messy. She never talked much about her family, and by the end, she was slipping. She'd say strange things, half Spanish, half English, names I didn't know, places she never told me about." Tom remained quiet, letting her speak at her own rhythm. 2 weeks before she passed, she gave me a key and an address, a barn in western Kansas. She told me, "Your grandfather left you something he couldn't carry." At the time, I thought it was just her being poetic or confused, but I went anyway. She paused, folding her hands. The barn had been abandoned for years. Roof was half collapsed, and in the back, under a tarp and a family of raccoons, was this. Car, no note, no explanation, just the title in a box, signed over to me. Tom nodded slowly. "And you brought it here." I didn't know what I was looking for, Elise said. I thought maybe it was just a last connection to my family, something to fix, something tangible in the middle of so much that wasn't. Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going. I didn't expect the pendant, or the maps, or the treasure. I didn't know any of it until you found those things. Until this car started talking back. Tom leaned against the bench, arms crossed. But you knew there was more to the story. She looked up at him then, eyes shining but steady. Yes, I knew my mother had secrets. I knew my grandfather wasn't just some immigrant with a quiet past. But I didn't come here chasing treasure, Tom. I came here chasing truth. I needed to know who I was, where I came from. And now that you do? He asked gently. Elise took a long breath. Now I need to figure out what to do with it. That afternoon, they sat side by side in the garage, surrounded by maps, ledgers, and yellowed letters. The pieces of Antonio Vega's legacy were sprawling across the table like a history lesson rewritten. There were ledgers listing donations to families fleeing war in Europe, secret payments to smugglers who'd helped hide artwork and gold from the Nazis, records of deposits made to small banks across the Midwest under false names, money quietly funneled into charities and orphanages after the war. Your grandfather didn't just steal gold, Tom murmured. He preserved it, protected it, and gave it away bit by bit. Elise traced her fingers over the names in the ledger. He lived like a ghost, but he made sure his past served something bigger. You think your mother knew? Maybe pieces, she said. But I think she was trying to protect me from it all, from the weight of it. Tom looked at her, the emotion in her face, the strength in her voice. And now you're carrying it. Elise nodded. I want to do something with it, not just keep it locked away. That night, Elise stayed behind after Tom closed the shop. She sat near the Duesenberg again, running her hand over the restored leather interior. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, not real words, but the shape of them, spoken through generations. Tom returned with 2 mugs of hot coffee, handing one to her without a word. They sat in silence for a long while, steam curling between them. I was angry at him for a long time, Elise said eventually, for leaving, for staying silent, for disappearing behind a story no one would tell. Tom sipped his coffee. You still angry? She shook her head. Not anymore. Now I just wish I could have asked him why. Tom looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe you just did, and maybe this car, this treasure, was the answer. Elise smiled, tired but genuine. Maybe. She turned to him then, her expression softening. You didn't have to help me, you didn't have to care. Tom shrugged, then met her eyes. Maybe I needed something to believe in again. Maybe I didn't know it until you pulled into the driveway. A moment passed. Quiet. Full warm in the way only rare silences can be. The truth was out. The secrets were no longer shadows between them. Now came the choice, what to do with the truth they'd uncovered. The next morning, Elise made a decision. She would take a portion of the treasure and establish a foundation in her grandfather's name, one dedicated to cultural preservation and refugee assistance. The rest, she insisted, should stay as part of the Duesenberg story, a traveling exhibit, a living legacy. You sure about this? Tom asked, watching her draft the plan at his desk. I've never been more sure, she said. This isn't about wealth, it's about meaning. And in that moment, Tom realized something. The woman who had arrived looking for restoration had found something far greater than a repaired car. She had found herself. They set out just after sunrise, the cold Colorado air crisp against their faces, the light cutting gold through the frost-covered pines. Elise sat beside Tom in his beat-up Ford Bronco, clutching a folder filled with copied maps and handwritten notes, while the lion pendant hung from her neck, heavy with history. Tom drove with quiet focus, his hands steady on the wheel as the road curved upward into the mountains. They were headed toward a place long forgotten, marked only on Antonio Vega's sketch, and in the cryptic line, "Under the lion's shadow, where stone meets sky." It sounded like poetry, but they both knew it was a direction. "It's strange," Elise murmured, looking out the window as evergreens blurred past. "This place was always here, just a few miles from town, but it might as well have been another world." Tom nodded. "Sometimes the closest secrets are the hardest to see." They turned off the main road onto a narrow dirt path, barely visible beneath patches of snow. Tom shifted into four-wheel drive, and the Bronco growled its way up the incline. The forest thickened, the silence deepening, broken only by the crunch of tires and the occasional caw of a raven overhead. Elise opened the map again, double-checking their coordinates. "We should be coming up on the ridge soon," she said. He marked it as Lion's Rock. Tom slowed as the trees thinned, and then, suddenly, it was there. The ridge rose before them in a jagged arc of stone, and near its center jutted a massive outcropping that unmistakably resembled a lion. Its head bowed, back-hunched, tail curling behind. Even bathed in snow, the resemblance was uncanny. Tom pulled the Bronco to a stop and turned off the engine. "This is it," Elise whispered. They stepped out into the morning stillness. The wind was sharp, but the sun was beginning to climb, casting long shadows across the rock's face. Tom grabbed his pack from the back seat, rope, flashlight, crowbar, and the brass key they'd used once before. Elise tucked the lion pendant inside her coat and followed him toward the rock. Behind the formation, partly hidden by brush and thyme, they found a narrow path winding upward. The climb was steep but manageable, and after 20 minutes they reached a flat shelf of stone that overlooked the valley below. It was there, nestled between the base of the lion-shaped rock and the cliff wall, that they saw it. A small, wooden door, weathered grey, set directly into the rock. Tom crouched to inspect it. No visible hinges, no knob. Just an iron plate at the center with a tiny keyhole. Elise stepped forward, heart racing, and removed the pendant from her neck. She turned it over, running her fingers along the lion's mane. As Tom watched, she pressed the base of the pendant into the iron plate. It clicked. The hidden panel slid open with a groan of ancient gears, revealing the keyhole beneath. Elise pulled the brass key from Tom's pack, took a deep breath, and inserted it. Another click. Then silence. Tom pushed gently, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow tunnel carved into the stone. They exchanged a glance. Tom took the lead, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was cold, the air stale but dry. Walls of stone framed their descent as they moved carefully down a gentle slope, the light revealing marks in the walls, initials, scratched symbols, and faded handprints. Signs of whoever had built this place, and perhaps those who had hidden within it. At the end of the passage, they entered a small chamber no larger than a modest kitchen. The walls were lined with wooden crates, sealed with wax, and stamped with the same crest as the ring, Antonio Vega's family seal. Elise stepped inside, breath catching in her throat. It was a vault, and it had been waiting for her. They pried open the nearest crate. Inside were neatly stacked gold ingots, still gleaming after nearly a century. Another crate revealed velvet pouches of jewels, others filled with paintings wrapped in silk and rolled scrolls of what appeared to be royal documentation. Birth, certificates, letters, deeds. Elise picked up one document, her hands trembling. It was a decree, signed in Madrid, dated 1931, confirming Antonio Vega's title as Marqués de Castellón. Her grandfather hadn't just come from nobility, he was nobility. Tom rested a hand on her shoulder. "This isn't just treasure," he said softly. "This is a legacy." Elise nodded, unable to speak. She knelt beside the largest crate and opened it. Inside was a small chest, carved from dark wood and inlaid with silver. She opened it slowly. Inside was a letter sealed in wax, addressed in looping script to the one who bears my name and my blood. With trembling hands, Elise broke the seal. My dearest, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and time has delivered you here, not by accident, but by choice. I was not a perfect man. I left behind pain as well as protection. I chose silence because the world was dangerous, and I did not know whom to trust. But you are my blood, my hope, and I trust that you will use what you find here not for glory but for good. This treasure was never mine. It belongs to those who need it. Let it bring healing, not division. Let it rebuild, not destroy. And know this, I loved you before I ever knew your name. Antonio Vega tears rolled down Elise's cheeks as she folded the letter and held it to her chest. For the first time, the story of her life felt whole. The questions, the silence, the absence, all of it led to this room, to this man, to this truth. Tom knelt beside her, his voice low. He left it all for you. She nodded through tears. He believed in something, and now, so do I. They sealed the chamber carefully, taking only the letter, a few documents, and the ring. The rest would be reported to authorities under historical preservation, not buried again, but shared with the world. Back at the ridge, as they stood beneath the lion-shaped rock once more, Elise looked out at the vast valley below. "It's like hearing an echo," she said softly. "Something old finally reaching me." Tom glanced sideways at her. "What do you hear?" She smiled, eyes misty but clear. "A promise. And a beginning." They were back in the garage by mid-afternoon, the Duesenberg gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a sleeping beast reborn. Outside, a fresh layer of snow covered the world in white silence. But inside, the air buzzed with something far, warmer purpose. Elise stood over the workbench, carefully laying out the documents they'd brought back from the mountain vault. Her grandfather's letter, royal decrees, and a hand-drawn inventory of the items hidden in the chamber. She studied every word with reverence, as if deciphering a message left for her heart more than her mind. Tom watched her from across the room, coffee in hand, his gaze lingering on the subtle transformation she had undergone. When they first met, Elise carried herself with practiced detachment, like someone braced for disappointment. But now there was light behind her eyes. Strength not born of confidence, but of connection, finally rooted to a past she once thought lost. "This line here," Elise said, pointing to the bottom of the inventory sheet. "It keeps pulling at me." Tom stepped closer. The line read, "One last chest, unmarked, for Isabel, to be delivered only if she is lost." He furrowed his brow. "We didn't see that chest in the vault." "No," Elise said, her voice quiet, "and I think he meant it that way." She pulled another map from the folder. It was the one they'd found earlier, different from the one that led them to the vault. The railway map. "I think the last chest never made it into the chamber," she said. "I think he was interrupted." Tom studied the map more closely now. One route was marked more heavily than the others. A train line leading west from New York, with a stop circled in red near Colorado Springs. Scrawled beside it in Spanish was a single word, desvío, detour. "You think he hid something along the railway?" Tom asked. "I think he tried to," Elise replied. "Maybe something went wrong. Maybe he got separated from Isabel, but he didn't forget her." Tom nodded slowly. "Then we follow the detour." The next morning, they drove 2 hours south, to the edge of Colorado Springs, the city rising gently against the backdrop of the Rockies. With the map guiding them, they found their way to an overgrown rail yard. Long abandoned, its tracks rusted and twisted beneath years of weeds and weather. Elise stared out at the remnants of the past with a kind of solemnity. "It must have been here," she whispered. Tom got out of the truck and surveyed the area. There wasn't much left. A few crumbling stone buildings, a water tower barely upright, and the skeletal remains of a rail platform. They wandered for over an hour, checking the structures, peering through boarded windows, stepping over cracked concrete and rotted beams. And then Tom saw it. At the far end of the yard, partially hidden behind a collapsed fence and an avalanche of brush, stood an old train car. Its paint was long faded, the exterior eaten by rust, but its shape was unmistakable. A private passenger coach, the kind reserved for dignitaries or wealthy travelers in the early 1900s. Tom motioned to Elise. "Over here." They approached slowly, unsure what time or man might have left behind. The door creaked open under Tom's hand. Inside, the air was thick with age and dust, but beneath it lingered something else. The faint scent of lavender, barely perceptible, like a memory. They stepped into the coach. The windows were streaked with grime, and the upholstery had long since given way to moths and decay. But in the corner, behind a broken panel of wood, near what was once a fold-out bed, Tom noticed something odd, a small brass hinge, perfectly intact. He knelt and pressed gently. A wooden tile popped open, revealing a hollow cavity beneath the floorboards, and inside it a chest, smaller than the others and unmarked, just as Antonio had written. Elise crouched beside him. Her hand trembled as she reached for the lid. Inside, wrapped in layers of silk and linen, were two items, a leather-bound journal and a locket. Elise picked up the locket first and opened it. On one side was a picture of Isabel, serene and elegant, the same woman from the old photograph. On the other side, Antonio, younger, with kind eyes and a half-smile that matched Elise's, a couple caught in time, a love suspended in secrecy. Tom handed her the journal. She opened it gently, the spine crackling with age. The first page read, "For Isabel, if ever we are parted, these words are my truth and my heart." They read through the journal for hours, sitting in the quiet ruin of the train car as snow began to fall again outside. Antonio's words painted a picture more vivid than any photograph. His escape from Spain under threat of imprisonment, his love affair with Isabel, an art historian who had helped him smuggle priceless works out of Madrid. Their journey across the Atlantic, the betrayal by a friend in New York, the fear that led them to split up to protect each other, and the treasure. The final entries were raw, filled with longing and regret. "If I do not find you, know that I have carried your name, like a flame in the dark, that this treasure was never worth more than one more day with you." When Elise reached the last page, she pressed the journal to her chest and closed her eyes. For a long time, neither she nor Tom said a word. Then finally, she whispered, "He loved her. He gave up everything, not for gold, but for her." Tom nodded, and he made sure her story wasn't forgotten. Later that evening, back in Silver Creek, Elise placed the locket and journal in the display case beside the Duesenberg. The car was now more than metal and polish. It was a shrine, a vessel of two entwined legacies. Antonio's courage, Isabel's sacrifice. "I want to tell the world," Elise said, her voice firm, "not about the treasure, but about them, about who they were, what they gave up." Tom smiled. "Then let's do it right." Together, they drafted a plan to turn the restored Duesenberg into the centerpiece of a traveling exhibit, Whispers of the Forgotten Road. It would feature not just the artifacts and maps, but the love story of Antonio and Isabel, told through journals, photographs, and the very car that carried their dreams. But in that moment, as the wind howled gently outside the garage, the two People left standing in its warm light didn't feel like curators of a story. They felt like they were living one. The wind was bitter that morning, howling through the pine-covered hills with the voice of something ancient. In the distance, the Rockies glimmered beneath a pale winter sun, their peaks like jagged teeth against the sky. Tom and Elise stood. At the edge of the old mining trail, the path ahead swallowed by snow and silence. They had returned to the hidden vault beneath the lion-shaped ridge, this time with the full weight of intention. Not just to unearth the past, but to lay it bare. Before the world, a historian from the State University had joined them, along with a government preservation officer. Elise had made the call herself, insisting that the treasure be handled with transparency and care. It wasn't hers, she had said, not in the way that gold so often tempts people to believe. It belonged to history, to the stories of those who never got to tell theirs. Tom watched her as she guided the small team down the passageway they had once entered alone. She moved with calm authority, her voice steady as she explained each artifact, each carving, each document tucked carefully into the stone chamber. The preservation officer, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and a cautious manner, took photographs and notes with methodical precision. The historian's eyes shone like a child's in a candy store, murmuring reverently as she examined the scrolls, the seal rings, the chests of coin and artwork wrapped in velvet. "This is," the historian whispered, "this is the kind of find that reshapes what we know about European migration to the Americas, about cultural preservation during the rise of fascism, about private resistance." Tom simply nodded. For him, it wasn't about rewriting textbooks. It was about honoring the journey of one man and the legacy that had rippled down through time to land in the hands of a woman who never asked to be the keeper of anything, but rose to the moment anyway. Elise stood before the largest chest in the vault, the one filled with Spanish doubloons. She touched the edge of it gently, then turned to the preservation officer. "I want this to be displayed," she said. "But only if it's contextualized, not just gold for gold's sake. Tell people where it came from, why it was hidden, what it cost." The officer met her gaze, clearly impressed. "We can ensure that. We'll transport the most sensitive items directly to the state's historical archive for conservation. With your permission, of course." "You have it," Elise said, "as long as the story remains intact." They spent the rest of the day cataloguing the items, carefully packing the documents and artwork, photographing every detail. Elise and Tom worked tirelessly alongside the team, refusing to simply stand by. By dusk, the vault was cleared of its treasures, but not its soul. The stone walls still held echoes of Antonio's letter, of the choices made in silence, and the love buried between paragraphs. Outside the tunnel, the sky had turned violet, streaked with fire where the sun dipped below the mountains. Elise stood beside Tom, watching the light fade. "Do you think he ever came back?" she asked softly. Tom shook his head. "I think he made peace with what he left behind. And I think he trusted that someday someone would come and carry it. The rest of the way," she nodded, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. "He never stopped loving her. Not even after all those years." "No," Tom said, "and he never stopped protecting her either." There was a long pause between them, filled only by the sound of wind through the trees. Then Elise turned. To him, "You've given me more than you know." He smiled gently. "You gave it to yourself. I just helped you see it." Back in Silver Creek that evening, the garage was quieter than usual. The Duesenberg sat at the center of the space, bathed in golden lamplight, fully restored. Its green paint gleamed like emerald beneath wax and polish. Its chrome shone with mirrored sharpness. But more than that, it now felt alive, less a vehicle, more a vessel of memory and meaning. Elise walked around the car slowly, fingers tracing its elegant lines. "It feels different now," she murmured. Tom stood beside her. "Because it is." It's carrying something it didn't before. A purpose, she said. He nodded. She looked up at him, her voice low. I want to take it on the road, the exhibit, city by city, not just for scholars or collectors, but for regular people, so they can see that even the most ordinary objects can hold extraordinary stories. Tom chuckled. You'll need a driver, she tilted her head. Are you offering? I might be. Their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them. Not romance in the traditional sense, not yet, but something deeper. A trust built in shared silence, in decisions made shoulder to shoulder. Something blooming slowly, like snow melting into spring. Elise turned back to the car, her voice suddenly wistful. You know what still gets me? What's that? That all of this, every letter, every map, every ounce of treasure, it only existed because two people refused to forget each other. Tom nodded, and because one man believed his story wouldn't end with him. Later that night, Elise sat alone in her motel room, the locket resting in her palm. She opened it again, staring at the tiny portraits inside. Antonio and Isabel, two lives suspended in time, two souls that had never truly parted. She reached for a notebook and began to write. Not history, not fiction. Something in between, a letter of her own, to her grandfather, to Isabel, to her mother, to herself. I found them. I found you. And I'm not afraid anymore. The silence is over. Your story will be told, and I will carry it with honor. Tears welled in her eyes, but she let them fall, not from sadness, but release. The next morning, she returned to the garage early. Tom was already there, sipping coffee, looking over an old photo they'd found of the Duesenberg on the docks in New York. You ready? He asked. Elise nodded. She walked up to the car, slipped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, not loudly, but with a steady confidence. A voice returned from long ago, speaking not in words, but in rhythm. Tom climbed in beside her. The garage doors rolled open, revealing the snow-dusted road ahead, the mountains shimmering in the morning sun, and together they drove, not away from the past, but straight into its light. Silver Creek's town square had never seen anything quite like it. The day the Duesenberg was unveiled at the community center, the townsfolk came in coats and scarves, lining up outside despite the cold. Children clutched their parents' hands. Older couples reminisced about bygone eras. Even the mayor, a pragmatic man not known for sentimentality, stood blinking back emotion as the car glistened under the soft winter sun like a relic pulled from the pages of a forgotten novel. Tom stood beside the vehicle, arms crossed, flannel. Shirt freshly pressed, boots shined just enough for the occasion. Elise stood at the front, speaking into the microphone with a poise that surprised even her. She told the story, not of gold or stolen treasure, but of two people, Antonio and Isabel, who chose love over power, sacrifice over safety. She spoke of exile, of silence, of the courage it took to hide something precious, not for gain, but for protection. And she spoke of the journey that brought her here, not just physically, but emotionally, of finding meaning in the rusted frame, of an old car and truth in the spaces between generations. When she finished, the crowd stood in quiet awe. No one clapped immediately. It wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, a gentle hush lingered, like the town itself was bowing its head in respect. Then slowly the applause began, soft, then building, and finally swelling into something warm and real, not polite, grateful. After the ceremony, people lingered. To view the exhibit, the locket was displayed beside the photograph of Antonio and Isabel. The journal sat open under glass. And of course, the car, restored to its former glory, was the centerpiece. Children asked questions. Veterans nodded in quiet understanding. Immigrants with accents still heavy from the countries they'd left behind stared longer than most, as if seeing their own stories reflected in Antonio's path. Tom watched Elise as she moved among them, not with the detachment of a presenter, but with the connection of someone who had lived the story she was telling. Later, as the sun began to dip and the crowd thinned, a man in his 70s approached the Duesenberg with reverence. He wore a World War II veteran's cap, his eyes watery. "My grandfather came through Ellis Island in '34, he said to Elise, voice rough with age. "Always said he left behind more than we could know. Maybe not treasure like this, but history. Thank you for bringing it forward." Elise took his hand in both of hers. "Thank you for carrying it this far." That evening, Tom and Elise sat on the garage steps, mugs of hot cider steaming in their hands. The Duesenberg rested inside, its engine cooled, but its presence still powerful. "You did good today," Tom said, nudging her shoulder gently. Elise chuckled. "I didn't trip over the microphone. That's a win." He gave her a look. "That wasn't just a speech, Elise. That was a gift. You gave this town a piece of something timeless." She grew quiet, gazing out at the snow-blanketed street. "I used to think purpose came from success, from achievement, titles, salaries. But all of that feels so shallow now." Tom nodded slowly. "It's funny. People chase wealth like it's a cure. But the real stuff, the kind that sticks, it's never something you can spend." "Like what?" she asked, turning toward him. He thought for a moment. "Like waking up with a reason, like being part of someone's story, like giving someone else hope." She smiled faintly. "So this is what healing feels like." Tom raised his mug. "Not bad, huh?" They clinked. Ceramic. The next morning, Elise met with a representative from a National Museum consortium. She explained her vision for the traveling exhibit, Whispers of the Forgotten Road, an immersive experience that would combine history, art, and personal storytelling. To her surprise, they didn't just agree. They were excited. But when they offered a sizable sum for the Duesenberg and full ownership of the collection, Elise paused. She asked for time to consider. That night, she and Tom walked through the quiet streets of Silver Creek. Christmas lights were going up, wreaths hung from old shop doors. Children laughed somewhere in the distance, their joy unburdened and pure. "They offered enough to change your life," Tom said carefully. "You could live anywhere, do anything." Elise looked up at him, snowflakes catching in her hair. "But I don't want to go anywhere," she said. "And I already am doing what I love." Tom smiled. "So you're not selling?" "No," she said. "I'm loaning. The exhibit will tour, but it'll return here, to this town, to the place where the story finally came full circle." He stopped walking, turning toward her. "Why here?" "Because this place reminded me that stories matter," she said. "That people like my grandfather and Isabel don't have to vanish. That history can be personal and transformative. And maybe," she added, her voice quieter now, "because this place gave me you." Tom looked down at her, something shifting behind his eyes. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the way she reached for his hand and the way he held on, that was something money could never buy. Over the next few weeks, the garage transformed. What had once been a place for oil changes and tire rotations became a hybrid space, a restoration workshop and a storytelling hub. Tom still fixed cars, of course, but now, between toolboxes and grease-stained walls, hung artifacts and framed photographs from the Vega legacy. Elise launched a non-profit foundation in her grandfather's name, focused on preserving hidden immigrant histories. She traveled often but always returned to Silver Creek, always came back to the garage, to the mountains, to the people who had become her roots. And as winter softened into spring, as snow melted and crocuses bloomed along the sidewalks, something else bloomed too, slow and steady, like love done right, not flashy, not hurried, just real. One Saturday afternoon, Tom stood outside the garage, wiping his hands on a rag as Elise pulled up in the Duesenberg. She stepped out, radiant in a sundress and boots, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. "You're late," he said, smiling. "You're impatient," she shot back. He walked toward her, stopping just short of where she stood. "So where to next?" She looked at him. "We could keep chasing stories. Or, she said, we could start writing one of our own." He took the bag from her shoulder. "Let's do both." And with that, they climbed into the car. The two people once haunted by the past, now building a future neither of them had planned, but both of them had hoped for. As the Duesenberg rumbled to life and rolled out of the garage once more, the sun broke through the clouds overhead, and down the winding road they went, not toward treasure, but toward everything money couldn't buy. If someone had told Tom Parker a year ago that his quiet garage in Silver Creek would become a destination on a National Museum tour, he would have laughed, probably offered them a coffee and told them to get their radiator checked. But now, as he stood beneath the warm spring sun, watching a small line of visitors form outside the newly painted garage doors, he realized life had gently, quietly taken a turn. And not just the garage. Tom himself. Inside, the space had been transformed. Without losing its soul, the Duesenberg stood beneath custom lighting on a rotating platform built by a few of the local high school seniors. Elise's photographs adorned the walls, interspersed with framed copies of Antonio Vega's letters and sketches. Old restoration. Tools were mounted like art, a nod to craftsmanship, to the care it took to bring something back from the edge of forgetting. The exhibit had just returned from its first official tour stop in Denver. Word had spread. Local news had picked it up. A feature was airing on public radio next week. Elise, now a board member of the non-profit she'd founded, had taken on a speaking circuit. Yet she still returned to Silver Creek every few weeks, to breathe, to reconnect, to be home. Tom had never been comfortable in the spotlight, but with Elise by his side, he found himself stepping into it with quiet confidence. He didn't speak in polished soundbites or dramatic phrases. He just told the truth about the car, the restoration, the stories it had unlocked, about what mattered. That afternoon, a woman in her 60s wandered into the garage as the crowd thinned. She wore a navy blue cardigan and carried a worn leather purse that looked older than the Duesenberg. Tom noticed her lingering near the framed letter from Antonio to Isabel. After a few minutes, she approached him. "You're the one who restored." "The car?" "I am," Tom said with a nod. She smiled softly. "I don't usually cry over machines, but this isn't just a machine, is it?" Tom shook his head. "No, ma'am, it's a story. It just happens to have wheels." The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My grandfather came from Spain. He used to tell me stories about a nobleman who fled with a woman and something precious. I thought he was just trying to make our family sound more interesting." She paused. "Until I heard about this." Tom accepted the paper, opened it carefully, and found a hand-drawn family tree, names in looping script that matched the style of Antonio's journals. Her family had once housed Antonio and Isabel during their travels west. "You're part of the story," Tom said. She pressed a hand to her chest. "I always hoped we were." Later, Tom found Elise on the back deck of the cottage she was renting just a few blocks away. She sat with her legs curled under her, a journal in her lap, the afternoon breeze ruffling her hair. The scent of lilacs drifted from the garden below. He handed her the folded paper and explained the encounter. As she read, her eyes softened. "It's happening," she whispered. "What is?" "This story. It's waking people up, bringing pieces back together. Families, memories, parts of themselves they didn't know they'd lost." Tom leaned on the railing, watching her. "You did that." She looked up. "We did that." There was a pause, not of uncertainty but of depth. "You know," she said, "when I found the Duesenberg I thought I was restoring a car. But I think it restored me." Tom's voice was quiet. "I know what you mean." She set the journal aside and walked to him. "What would you say if I stopped traveling so much?" "I'd say I was wondering when you'd come to that decision." She smiled. "And if I said I wanted to stay, really stay, start something here, a life?" Tom didn't answer right away. He simply reached out, took her hand, and laced his, fingers through hers. "I'd say I've been building something here for a while," he said. "I just didn't know it until you showed up." Over the following months, the garage expanded, not in square footage, but in spirit. Tom added a side bay dedicated solely to restoring vintage cars for veterans and retirees who couldn't afford the work. Donations from the exhibit helped fund it, and volunteers came out of the woodwork. Kids, seniors, even tourists wanting to contribute to something meaningful. They called it the Legacy Bay. One afternoon, a Vietnam vet brought in a battered '49 Ford pickup that had belonged to his father. "I tried to fix it 100 times, he told Tom, "but I never had the tools or the heart." Tom, now with Elise at his side more often than not, handed him a shop towel and said, "Let's do it together." One quiet evening in early summer, Tom and Elise sat in the garage long after the last visitors had gone. The Duesenberg gleamed under the lights, but neither of them looked at it. They were watching the shadows on the floor, sipping coffee, their bodies tired but full. "Do you ever think about how different everything could have been?" Elise asked. Tom nodded. "All the time. If I hadn't driven into your garage, if you hadn't taken the job, I was going to turn you down," he said with a smirk. She raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yeah. Thought it was too much work, too complicated, too everything." "What changed your mind?" He looked at her, expression soft. "You did. You walked in like someone who'd been searching for something a long time. I guess I recognized that, because I'd been searching too." Elise leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad we found each other in the dust." He chuckled. "Some things are worth restoring." They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled, only shared. And in that silence, surrounded by oil stains, chrome, and memory, a love fully formed took root, not loud, not hurried, but deep and certain. Outside, the town of Silver Creek was settling in for the night. Lights twinkled in cottage windows. The scent of cut grass and honeysuckle hung in the warm air, and in a quiet garage at the edge of town, two people, one with calloused hands, the other with a heart once fractured by silence, sat side by side, knowing they had not just restored a car. They had rebuilt meaning. They had rebuilt home. The morning air in Silver Creek was warm, with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Spring had surrendered to early summer, and with it came the quiet hum of life unfolding. Porch swings creaking, children chasing bikes down sleepy lanes, the low rumble of an engine echoing from Tom Parker's garage. But today wasn't an ordinary day. Today marked the 1-year anniversary of the discovery of Antonio Vega's hidden vault, a moment that had not only unearthed treasure, but rewoven the threads of a life Elise once thought lost. She stood in front of the Duesenberg, dressed in a soft blue sundress, her hair loosely pinned, eyes sparkling with purpose. The car had been polished to perfection for the occasion, but Elise herself radiated something even more luminous. Peace. "Ready?" Tom asked as he approached, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He had traded his grease-stained flannel for a crisp button-down and a leather tool bag slung over one shoulder, a nod to who he was and who he had become. Elise looked at him and smiled. "More than I thought I'd ever be." He offered his arm and she took it. Together, they walked into the newly dedicated Vega Cultural and Historical Center, a beautifully restored brick building at the edge of town, once the site of an abandoned train depot. Now it was the permanent home of the Whispers of the Forgotten Road exhibit, a living archive of Antonio and Isabel's journey, the hidden treasure and the enduring legacy left behind by two people who chose love over fear. The ribbon cutting ceremony was modest but meaningful. Local families stood shoulder to shoulder with historians, veterans, teachers, and even a few distant descendants of the Vega lineage who had come after reading about Elise's story in national publications. Elise stepped to the podium. Her voice was clear, steady, and full of conviction. My grandfather believed that some stories are too powerful to stay buried. Today, we don't just honor his legacy or Isabel's sacrifice. We honor the idea that love, truth, and courage, no matter how quietly lived, always find their way home. The crowd rose in applause, not the thunderous kind, but warm and wholehearted. Tom clapped with the rest, but his eyes never left Elise. She had grown into her name, her voice, her place in the world, and she had brought him with her. Later, that evening, the two of them sat beneath the stars behind the center, a string of lanterns swaying gently above them, casting soft light on the patio. The sounds of the celebration still lingered, clinking glasses, distant laughter, but here, in this moment, it was just them. "I still can't believe it's real sometimes," Elise said, her chin resting in her hand. "Everything that's happened, the people we've met, the lives this story has touched." Tom smiled. "It's more than real, it's rooted now. You've planted something that's going to keep growing long after we're gone." She looked at him, searching his face. "And what about you? You always wanted to stay here, didn't you?" Tom shrugged. "I used to think I did, but now I think I was waiting for something worth staying for." She reached over and laced her fingers through his. "So what happens next?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Whatever we build, together." In the weeks that followed, life didn't slow down. It deepened. The foundation expanded its outreach, helping immigrant families trace and preserve their own histories. Local schools began including the Vega story in their curriculum. And every weekend, the garage filled with voices, visitors, volunteers, and old friends, drawn not just to the Duesenberg, but to the warmth of a place where history felt alive. Elise took on the role of director for the center, but never abandoned the personal side of the work. She still hosted storytelling nights once a month, where neighbors shared family heirlooms and passed down tales over cups of cider and guitar tunes played on the porch. Tom, meanwhile, returned to his tools, but with renewed purpose. He no longer just fixed what was broken, he helped restore what mattered. Each car in the Legacy Bay came with its own story, and Tom made time for all of them. Sometimes Elise would join him late in the evenings, reading aloud from Antonio's journal as he worked under a lifted hood. It became their rhythm, their version of forever. One late summer afternoon, Elise surprised Tom with something he hadn't expected. "I've been thinking," she said, standing in the garage doorway with that familiar spark in her eyes. "We've spent so much time preserving the past. What if we created something new?" Tom looked up from under a Model T, brow lifted. "Like what?" She stepped forward, holding out a folder. He opened it to find architectural drawings. A small expansion, nothing grandiose, just enough room for workshops, a research space, and a storytelling studio. "For future restorers," she said, "future historians, a place where people can come build something, where they can connect through the stories they carry." Tom stared at the plans, then looked at her. "You never stop, do you?" he said, his voice thick with admiration. She grinned. "Not when I've finally found what I was meant to do." He rose and kissed her forehead, then whispered, "Let's build it." And so they did. Together. Brick by brick, piece by piece, story by story. They didn't become famous. They didn't get rich. But the people who walked through their doors left a little fuller than they came, a little more connected, a little more seen because of a forgotten car, because of a brave man and a hidden love, because of a woman who chose to seek the truth, and a mechanic who knew that sometimes the things most worth fixing weren't broken engines, but hearts. 1 year later, Tom and Elise climbed into the Duesenberg once more, this time for no reason at all. No museum opening, no press event, just a drive, through winding roads and tall pines, past familiar landmarks and into open sky. The windows down, the wind in their hair, and the world rolling out ahead of them like a canvas yet to be painted. Elise looked over at Tom. "Where are we going?" He smiled. "Anywhere we want." And with the sun warm on their backs and the road stretching wide before them, they drove on, into a future not promised, but beautifully earned. Before you go, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel, and I truly enjoy reading every message you leave. And if this story touched your heart, or made you think about the hidden treasures in your own life, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. We share real, inspiring stories just like this, about love, kindness, and the quiet miracles that change everything. Thank you so much for watching, and for spending a little of your day with me. Until next time, take care, and never stop believing in the power of a simple story.